You're sitting in your living room. You're scrolling through your phone. You're not thinking about ancient history. You're not thinking about lost civilizations. You're not thinking about the possibility that everything you were taught about the past might be wrong. But what if it is? What if there was a civilization before all the ones we know about? A civilization that was global, a civilization that was advanced. And what if we're just now starting to find the evidence? This is not science fiction. This is a question that serious archaeologists, geologists, and historians are starting to ask. And the answer, if it exists, would change everything. Let's start with the obvious. We've been told that human civilization began about 6,000 years ago. That's when the first cities appeared in Mesopotamia. That's when writing was invented. That's when we became civilized. But that timeline has always been suspicious, because there are structures on this planet that don't fit that timeline. There are structures that are older than they should be, structures that are more advanced than they should be, and structures that appear all over the world, built by cultures that supposedly never met. Take Göbekli Tepe. It's a site in Turkey that dates back about 12,000 years. That's twice as old as the pyramids. It's a complex of massive stone pillars, carved with intricate animal figures. And it was built by hunter-gatherers, people who hadn't yet invented agriculture, people who hadn't yet invented cities, people who, according to the standard timeline, shouldn't have been able to organize that kind of labor. But they did. And then, after they built it, they buried it. Deliberately. They covered it with dirt and stone and walked away. Why? We don't know. Then there's the Yonaguni Monument. It's an underwater structure off the coast of Japan. It looks like a stepped pyramid. It has straight edges, right angles, and what appear to be carved pathways. Some researchers believe it's natural. Others believe it's man-made. And if it is man-made, it would have to be at least 10,000 years old, because that's when it was submerged by rising sea levels. That would mean a civilization existed at the end of the last ice age, a civilization that built monumental structures, a civilization that's been erased from history. And then there's the problem of the pyramids. Not just the ones in Egypt. Pyramids appear all over the world. In Mexico, in Peru, in China, in Indonesia. They're not identical, but they're similar. And they were built by cultures that supposedly never met. How is that possible? The standard answer is that humans independently invented pyramid building. But that doesn't explain the similarities in construction techniques. It doesn't explain the alignment with celestial bodies. It doesn't explain the mathematical precision. And it doesn't explain the fact that many of these pyramids are built on top of older structures, structures that are even more mysterious. And then there's the map. The Piri Reis map was drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral. It shows the coastline of South America and Africa with remarkable accuracy. But it also shows something else. It shows Antarctica. And Antarctica wasn't discovered until 1820. More importantly, the map shows Antarctica without ice. That means the map must have been based on a source that predates the ice sheet. That source would have to be at least 10,000 years old. So who made it? And how did they know what Antarctica looked like without ice? The conventional answer is that the map was based on ancient sources that no longer exist. But that's just another way of saying, we don't know. And that's the thing that keeps the question alive. There are so many things we don't know. So many anomalies. So many structures that don't fit the timeline. So many pieces of evidence that suggest a lost civilization. And then there's the genetic evidence. DNA analysis has shown that modern humans carry traces of ancient interbreeding with other hominins, Neanderthals, Denisovans, and possibly others. But what if there was another group? What if there was a population of humans that was more advanced than the rest? A population that built cities, developed technology, and then disappeared. We've found fossils of Homo sapiens that are over 300,000 years old. But we haven't found evidence of complex society at that age, yet. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It means we haven't found it. And absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. There's also the question of the missing artifacts. We've found tools, weapons, and pottery. But we haven't found any evidence of advanced technology from that era. But what if we have, and we just don't recognize it? There are artifacts that have been found in geological strata that don't match the accepted timeline. Some of them are made of materials that shouldn't exist in that context. Some of them show signs of machining that shouldn't have been possible with primitive tools. Some of them are just too perfect, too precise, too advanced. And when they're discovered, they're often dismissed as hoaxes or misidentifications. But what if they're real? There's a theory that's been gaining traction in recent years. It's called the Silurian hypothesis. It proposes that an industrial civilization may have existed on Earth millions of years ago, and that any evidence of it would have been erased by geological processes. It's a thought experiment, not a serious claim. But it raises an interesting question. How long would evidence of our civilization survive? If we disappeared tomorrow, what would be left in a million years? A few fossils, some chemical traces, maybe some plastic. But most of our cities, our technology, our entire civilization would be gone. So what if something similar happened before us? What if there was a civilization that rose and fell before the last ice age, and all that's left are the anomalies? And then there's the mythology. Almost every culture on Earth has a story of a lost civilization, a golden age, a time when humans lived in harmony with the gods, a time when knowledge was abundant and wisdom was common. The Greeks had Atlantis, the Hindus had the city of Dwarka, the Egyptians had Tepe, the first time, the Mayans had the previous world ages. These stories are usually dismissed as myth. But what if they're memory? What if they're a distorted recollection of something real? What if every culture on Earth is remembering the same event, the same civilization, the same loss? There's also the problem of the flood. Almost every culture has a flood myth, a great flood that destroyed the world. The Bible has Noah's Ark. The Sumerians had the Epic of Gilgamesh. The Hindu tradition has the story of Manu. The Mayans had a flood that destroyed the previous age. The Chinese have a flood myth. The Native Americans have flood myths. The Aboriginal Australians have flood myths. It's the same story, told in different ways, across every continent. And it's almost certainly based on a real event. At the end of the last ice age, sea levels rose by over 400 feet. Coastlines disappeared. Land bridges submerged. Entire landscapes were swallowed by the sea. It would have been a catastrophic event for any coastal civilization. And if there was a civilization that lived on the coast, it would have been destroyed. So what if it's all true? What if there was a global civilization that existed before the last ice age? A civilization that was advanced enough to build pyramids, to map the world, to understand astronomy. A civilization that was destroyed by the rising seas and then forgotten? And what if we're starting to find the evidence? The discovery of Göbekli Tepe changed everything. It forced archaeologists to rethink the timeline of civilization. It showed that humans were capable of complex organization long before we thought. And it raised the question, if they built this, what else did they build? What else is still buried, waiting to be found? What else is hiding under the earth, under the sea, under the ice? The discovery of the Yonaguni Monument raised similar questions. If it's man-made, it rewrites the history of Japan. It shows that a civilization existed there at the end of the Ice Age. It shows that they had the ability to carve stone on a massive scale. It shows that they had the organization, the labor, the technology. And it raises the question, what else is underwater? What else is waiting to be discovered? And then there's the discovery of the underground cities in Turkey. Derinkuyu is an entire city carved into the rock, extending dozens of stories underground. It could house thousands of people. It had ventilation shafts, water systems, and defensive mechanisms. It was built by people who needed to hide. But hide from what? And when was it built? The official dates don't line up. Some researchers believe it's much older than we think. The evidence is there. It's fragmented, it's ambiguous, and it's often ignored. But it's there. And more is being discovered every year. The more we look, the more we find. The more we find, the more questions we have. And that's what makes this question so compelling. It's not just about the past. It's about who we are. It's about where we came from. It's about whether we're part of a story that's much older than we think. So what if we discover evidence of an ancient global civilization? What if we find proof that a lost civilization existed? What would that do to our understanding of history? It would rewrite the textbooks. It would change the way we think about human potential. It would show us that we're not the first. It would show us that we might not be the last. It would give us a sense of continuity, a sense of connection to something larger than ourselves. It would humble us. It would inspire us. It would force us to ask, what will they think of us 1,000 years from now? What will they find? What will they remember? And what will be lost? The question is not whether evidence exists. It's whether we're willing to look.